So good morning and welcome. I'm Monica Ferry. I'm the Chief Executive of the Genetic Support Network of Victoria. And welcome to our celebration of Genetic Undiagnosed and Rare Disease Day. To all of our community, welcome. This is a day when we come together in strength, in harmony, and in acknowledgement of all people living with genetic undiagnosed and rare conditions and all those who support them. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are meeting from and on the lands of our First Nations peoples. I extend my welcome and respect to all past, present and emerging leaders, and my deepest respect and gratitude for our Indigenous peoples' cultural traditions and connections to the land and the care extended to it for thousands of years. It's so wonderful to be here, face to face and together on Zoom. What a surprise. While a whole year and more has passed since our shared COVID experience, I feel that one outstanding legacy for which I am appreciative is that it has left a permanent reminder to be grateful for each other and the opportunities to share our lives and to always take a moment to acknowledge and feel the power of people coming together in common purpose. I'm grateful to be sharing today with all of you, and thank you for being here. I'd also like to acknowledge the huge amount of work, as always, by the GSNV team and our volunteers who are with us today. We are an inclusive and small team. Everyone contributes as they can, and miracles happen. Thank you to Holly, to Nat, who isn't with us today because she has gastro. Welcome to our world. And Louisa. And yes, the team's a little smaller than usual. Thankfully, we're in the process of recruiting. I'd also like to acknowledge our presenters, Richard Vines from Rare Cancers Australia, Tiffany Bortwood from Australian Genomics, Alison Archibald from the Mackenzie's Mission Project team, and Carla Carroll from Ingena, the Genomics Industry Alliance, many of whom tried to rearrange their lives so they could be here in person, and then as that became impossible, they created wonderful presentations for us to share. Tiff's here in person, which is excellent. Thanks, Tiff. I'd also like to welcome our co-creation expert, Nikki Conway, who is with us and will also lead our workshop this afternoon after a presentation about co-creation and design to complete our session this morning. Today, unlike other GSNV Rare Disease events, I'm not going to talk about the past year for the GSNV or the year ahead for the GSNV. Our December newsletter was absolutely packed with the things that we achieved last year, and our next newsletter will be absolutely packed with what we're planning for 2023. So I'd encourage you to read those or reach out. We're really happy to talk about what we've done and where we're going. We titled our event this year, "Nothing About Us Without Us," a slogan that you have all heard before. It's been around for years, and yet we still need to say it, remind people of it, and fight for it. We are still elbowing our way into projects and research, asking for a seat at the table, pushing into conversations and seeking support to give individuals, families and our communities a voice to ensure patient-led care and decision-making and to improve the quality of lives for those we love. Engagement with us has definitely increased, and it's improved significantly over past years. But my most asked question in presentations remains, and how was the patient voice included in that? I've always been conscious that the GSNV is one voice, a representative voice that listens to our community, but still just one. As a community, we have shared understanding that change requires collaboration, a shared and agreed direction by us and all our stakeholders that is active and inclusive. We are living in exciting times, and yes, I think I say that every year. Discovery becomes possibilities, and possibilities become reality. Currently, there are 2 existing strategies in this country about the direction and implementation of genomics at a government level. This will change. As over past years, our environment is dynamic. But what about us? What are our priorities? What are the priorities of people living with genetic, undiagnosed and rare disease, families and communities? And how do we ensure that these priorities, needs and expectations are met and heard? Today we will hear about alliances, collaborations. It doesn't matter what word we use. These are success stories about how stakeholders, including community, have come together with purpose and achieved or are achieving something of meaning. Today is an opportunity to determine as a community why we would come together, who we would and should involve, what we would focus on and prioritise, how it might work, how we might go forward, and how do we avoid duplicating some of the great work that's already happening. This afternoon is where the rubber hits the road, and we will work through these elements to co-create or co-design a space or environment if that is determined as the most effective way forward. This will be a collaborative and collective exploration, and your voice is important. Any outcome must serve us and our community, and we must work through together how to build it. For those who are online or those who are unable to join us this afternoon, your thoughts and ideas are welcome and important. And we'll send a discussion summary out after this afternoon for your comment, and then we will send it out broader after we have your feedback incorporated. Now, I should say at this point that I have absolutely no idea where that discussion's going to lead us, what we will create or not. But the uncertainty is exciting to me because it leaves us with possibility. Wherever we go, whatever we choose, will serve the needs of our community. That's why we have expert help and some guidance from others through their presentations to assist and fuel our thinking. We are lucky enough to live in a democracy, and as a favourite of mine, Abraham Lincoln, so eloquently stated, democracy is rule of the people, for the people, by the people. Today is our democratic moment. Nothing about us without us, ever. Thank you, and let's begin our presentations.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me to speak with you on World Rare Disease Day. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I'd certainly like to acknowledge all of the Australians who are living with and dealing with a rare disease on a day-to-day basis. We all know that it's a great challenge, and to have a day where we can acknowledge that is a wonderful thing. It's always been important to Rare Cancers Australia and for our patients to know that there is a day, and I think particularly not so much this year, but I think next year when we are able to acknowledge it on a rare day indeed, the 29th of February. So it's wonderful to be with you. Before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which I'm on, which is the Gundungari people, and I'd also like to acknowledge their elders past, present and emerging. A little bit about RCA before we go too much further. For those of you who don't know us, we were formed in 2000. 2012. We're specifically aimed at rare and less common cancer patients. We have two themes, one of which is supporting today's patients. We have a patient support team of 4 people, and at any one point in time we're supporting just under 1,000 patients living with rare or less common cancers. We also look after, or attempt to look after, tomorrow's patients by working with government and advocating to government for better health systems that cross over into the rare space, and that's where we have commonality with rare disease organisations. Sometimes the acute nature of cancer and the chronic nature of some rare diseases means that we have slightly different focus, but we are common around the rarity of the diseases and the challenges that brings, in the sense that government and public health systems are broadly around doing the greatest good for the greatest number, and that by definition creates an exclusion of rare patient populations. And our job is to bring attention to those for improved funding of research, for improved funding of care, and improved funding of access to both medicines and other treatment technologies. And that's what we do. One of those things, when we start talking about what it is that we do and how we do it, particularly for tomorrow's patients, is advocacy. And advocacy is about obtaining change. And one of the challenges when people think about advocacy is, how do we do this? Why do we do it? And how do we make sense of it? And the first thing I'd like to talk to you a little bit about is, why do we do it? We do it because, and I think there could not be a better example of it than what's going on in Australia at the moment. Every time you pick up the paper, there's a crisis in primary health, there's a crisis in hospital care, there's a crisis in rural and regional care, and all of these crises are really a synonym for, please government, can we have more money? And that includes the AMA, the Royal College of General Practitioners, the various hospitals, research organisations, all lining up in a queue asking for money. And if we don't do the same as representatives of Australians living with rare diseases or rare cancers, then we will just be forgotten. And it is as simple as that. And that's without even taking into account the needs of our defence and military, the needs of our education, the needs of our environment. All of these people are all lining up and asking government for money. And if we're not there, and if we're not there with a united voice and a clear ask, then our patients, our constituents, if you like, will suffer. So that's our motivation, to get the best that we can, both in terms of policy and funding and access to treatments, as fast as we can for the people that we're charged with caring about. We share that common interest, as do a number of other types of organisations, clinicians, other patient groups, treatment industry. We might not have the same fundamental motivation as, for example, pharmaceutical companies, but we both have a common interest, which is to get the latest, best therapies to patients. When we considered this, we thought that one voice alone is probably not enough. We can be a loud voice, we can be effective, we can be persuasive, but I spent enough time around politicians to know that if we can bring 10 voices or 100 voices together, all asking for the same thing, it becomes a very easy way for a government to work. A government can sit there and say, I've got all of the key stakeholders in this particular community, the rare disease community, asking for the same thing and the same levels of reform or funding or whatever. I'm safe to go ahead with that. And that's what you have to try and build if we're going to build sensible, reasonable alliances. Two things about rare cancers. One is, we're not a peak body. We never aim to be a peak body because we didn't have a mandate to be that. We didn't set out that way. We don't have a membership. We're just an organisation that looks after a specific group of patients. So when we wanted to build this coalition or this alliance of common interested parties, we set up essentially a collaborative brand. It doesn't have a separate secretariat. It doesn't have anything specific that you can nail down. It's called the National Oncology Alliance. It's a brand of Rare Cancers Australia. And I want to share with you how we did what we did and what the successes of the National Oncology Alliance have been, in the hope that it may give you a way forward with some of the initiatives that you're working on, and highlight some of the challenges. So for us, we thought when we first started to think about the National Oncology Alliance, we thought we'll bring together all of 4 pillars. We'll bring together selected representative patients specifically, rather than just patient groups. I think there's a difference, and I think they're an important voice to have in the room. Patient groups are kind of, to me, like the shop steward of patients, and that's a different thing. So we thought we'd have patients, we'd have patient groups, we'd have clinicians and researchers, and we'd have treatment industry, being pharmaceutical and radiation oncology and others, diagnostics, et cetera, and we'd bring them together in a common voice. And we tried that, and we put people in the room, we tried to look for common agendas, and our intention probably initially was to appoint a almost quasi-independent body that had a steering committee, and that went on its way. And we found that largely to be impractical. We had rooms full of 10, 15 different organisations talking about issues, and it's almost impossible in that situation to have a coherent ask. So we stopped, we reflected, we thought this is not going to get to quite where we want. We thought what we need to do is something slightly different. So we thought about what was going on when we were bringing these 4 pillars, we called them, together, and we found that it was just too complex. We had so many people with so many ideas about the sorts of things that the Alliance should be doing that it wasn't really going to get anywhere. So we slightly changed track, and we said, what do we think is important? What do we want to do? And we were very, very, very much aware that we didn't have a comprehensive Australian cancer plan. That we knew that individual diseases like lung cancer, like blood cancers, and individual states like Victoria, New South Wales, Queensland all had different cancer plans, but there was nothing binding them together. And we thought that would be a fundamental thing that you would do in anything. If if you're going to go to the shops, you plan. So why on earth does Australia not have a current Australian cancer plan? So we thought, how do we advocate for that, and how do we change the conversation? So we thought that we would, through the Alliance, we would prepare a report, not one that criticised the current state of treatment, not one that criticised the current government, not one that did anything retrospectively, but said, this was in 2020, we said in 2020 we're going to look forward 10 years and we're going to look forward at the treatment types that are coming and the way the technology and patient care is going to evolve over those 10 years, and present that to government and say, all of this change is coming, we need a comprehensive plan to go forward with. So then we went and we thought, okay, we'll take this out now to those people who've expressed an interest in being part of the National Oncology Alliance, and we'll start to move forward. And we appointed an advisory committee, and we had representatives of, and I stress advisory, not steering, and we had representatives from each of the 4 sections, from patient groups, patients, clinicians, and industry. And they met and we talked a little bit, but fundamentally they were providing advice, and our team was busy preparing with consultants and various other people, preparing to write this Vision 2030 report. And what we did was we thought, how do we build a broad alliance and bring these people together, and have them participate in a way that makes everybody feel involved, that doesn't clog the system. So we ran workshops, we ran topic-specific workshops. We ran, I think, 13 workshops on subjects as varied as precision oncology, radiation oncology, the use of artificial intelligence in areas such as radiation oncology and data analysis. We ran it around data. We talked about genomics. We had workshop. And each of those workshops, one of the blessings, by the way, of COVID is that it's easy to get a professor from a university or a cancer centre or any rare disease centre to spend half an hour talking to you on a Zoom call because they don't have to move. We don't need them for a day, we need them for half an hour. So we had great participation from people, and I think on average we never had less than 100 people on one of these workshops. So by the end of those 12 workshops, we had consulted really widely with a whole range of experts. We had massive content, but we also had over 1,000 people from within the cancer community who participated in those workshops and been able to ask questions, see and understand. And from there we went forward, we wrote the report, we were able to go, importantly, we could go to government and say to them, here is all the people we've spoken to. They are all supportive of you developing an Australian cancer plan. And here is a futures framework that we've developed. And it involves no criticism. It was nothing that the government needed to defend because we were forward-looking. We weren't going back and saying, you know, you've been denying patients treatments for the last 4 years, how dare you? We have been saying, all we were saying was, this is all that's coming, we need a plan. Really simple ask. But and I think it's really important. I think there are times when government should be criticised. I think there are times when government should be held to account on behalf of our patients. But by and large, if you mount a negative campaign in this space, a government has to survive 2 days, thereabouts, of media that you might generate before it's all forgotten. And you're much better off working constructively, working creatively with them and providing opportunities that fit within the broad bounds of what is realistic to have achieved. I think for us, the lessons out of the Alliance were that it was largely single issue. We will use it again, and it's a brand that can bring people together. It doesn't interfere with the core work of Rare Cancers Australia, which is really more and more about looking after today's patients and making sure that there's a specific focus in some areas of policy and funding. Its proof is in its pudding. The government, Greg Hunt, mandated the development of the Australian Cancer Plan. We're now, I think, about a month away from the final version of that plan being released. It's done amazing. It's done an amazing job of coalescing all of those other sub-plans into something that's coherent. It's looked at the issues around genomics and genomic testing and genomic screening, which I know are equal issues for rare diseases. The decision to plan for comprehensive cancer centres where we can have research and treatment happening at the same time. All of these issues, it's looking at First Nations people and how their needs in the rare cancer space, in cancer and rare cancers. It's done an enormous amount of good, and it was all done without rancour. And I think that's the message that I'd love to leave you with, that you can perform advocacy in a way that is sensible, that is collaborative, as long as you choose your issue and acknowledge that sometimes one of the organisations participating in the alliance or the collaboration will have a different subset of priorities, alternative set of priorities, but you're coalescing around one and you stay within that one goal. And I can only imagine that, you know, if we looked at some of the issues around navigation, assistant nurse navigation or social worker navigation for people with rare diseases, if we look at access to treatments, reforming the life-saving drugs program, all of these things are issues that you can coalesce around. And I think there's a lot of work to do in that space, and I think you could collectively come together without being subjected to you know, not necessarily trying to pretend they're a peak body, but rather coming together and working as as an alliance, as a collective, so that when you go to government and government has to sit there and think about what you're asking for, they know that all of the main players in the room, in the community, are of one mind. And if you can build that, it becomes really easy for a Mark Butler or a Bill Shorten or a Jim Chalmers or any of those to work with you and say, yeah, we can do this because this is what all of you want. And that's the key. So I'll leave you with that thought. I hope this has been helpful. I won't be dishonest, it's hard doing it straight to camera, but I hope it's been valuable for you. And I'm sorry I can't be with you in person today, but thank you for inviting me, and good luck with the rest of the day. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ali. I'm a genetic counsellor and manage a team of genetic counsellors at BCGS, and we provide support around the reproductive genetic services that BCGS offers. So today I'm going to speak briefly with you about our efforts around community engagement around reproductive genetic carrier screening. So firstly, this is a topic that you may be familiar with, but for those who are not, when we talk about reproductive genetic carrier screening, we're talking about screening that provides prospective parents with information about their chance of having children with inherited genetic conditions. And so while these conditions individually are rare, collectively we know that they occur relatively frequently, and about 2% of reproductive couples have an increased chance for having children with a serious genetic condition. There's been a lot of research done in this area, which has shown that there's support for and interest in carrier screening, provided that it's offered in an optional way. Carrier screening is here and is a concept because it promotes choice and reproductive autonomy. And this screening is relevant to all prospective parents, regardless of family history or ethnicity. And guidelines from both the RACGP and RANZCOG recommend carrier screening to all people before or early in pregnancy. So we've really seen quite an evolution in genetic carrier screening over time. And particularly at BCGS, we've gained a lot of experience in carrier screening because we've been involved in it for quite some time. So the idea of carrier screening really evolved sort of in the 1970s with screening for hemoglobinopathies and Tay-Sachs disease. And that was really looking at screening particular blood parameters. But as more was known about the human genome and the genes associated with particular conditions, the idea of screening for those conditions then became a reality. And so this century, we've really seen a significant evolution in the idea of screening, from screening for single conditions to screening for large panels of many conditions. And so over that time, our services have really evolved. And around 2018, 2019, we saw the introduction of Mackenzie's mission, which I'll talk about more shortly. And that's really looking at how we make carrier screening much more equitable from an access perspective to the Australian population. Throughout that time, engagement with support organisations has been really key. So when those earlier screening programs were established, primarily around cystic fibrosis, there was really important engagement work that was done with CF Victoria. And then as we expanded our screening to include other conditions like Fragile X syndrome and spinal muscular atrophy, we were able to bring in and engage those relevant patient support organisations. And they really provided us really helpful input into how we should develop those screening programs to make sure we were really delivering that screening in an appropriate manner. And then as we move through into Mackenzie's mission and screening for much larger number of conditions, that engagement becomes even more important because of the range of conditions that are involved. So there's really now a recognition that equity of access and carrier screening is a really important consideration, because we have a number of tests at the moment offered on a user pays basis. And we know from our research that the vast majority of reproductive couples are not accessing carrier screening when they're planning a pregnancy. And that's not because they don't want to access it, it's because they don't know it exists. And so it's really important now to focus our efforts around improving equity of access. So that's where Mackenzie's mission came in. And Mackenzie's mission really evolved out of the story of little Mackenzie Casella, who passed away at 7 months of age from spinal muscular atrophy in 2017. And her parents had seen their GP prior to pregnancy and had asked what tests were available. And carrier screening did exist, but it wasn't offered to them. And so they wanted to know, how did we not know that we were carriers? For many years, healthcare providers and patient support organisations like SMA Australia had been advocating for accessible carrier screening. So that was sort of happening in parallel to Mackenzie's story and her parents' experience. So the Casellas lobbied the members of Parliament for funding and research, and the Federal Health Minister at the time, Greg Hunt, really advocated for a research study and named it Mackenzie's mission. So the idea of Mackenzie's mission, which was formerly known as the Australian Reproductive Genetic Carrier Screening Project, was to offer screening to over 10,000 couples across the country through specific healthcare providers. The screening that was provided was for 1,300 genes associated with about 750 inherited genetic conditions. And the aim was really to inform future practice around reproductive genetic carrier screening. And the study ended late last year. There's actually a typo in my slide. It was late last year, although there is still work that's ongoing around reporting the outcomes of Mackenzie's mission. Again, engagement with patient support organisations has been a really, really key part. So around the beginning of Mackenzie's mission, we established a community engagement reference group. And that involved a number of key stakeholders from patient support organisations and was chaired by Monica Ferry from GSNV. And the idea of the group was really to provide input across the study during the design and the implementation phases. So if you think about the sort of the different phases of the study in terms of offering screening to people, education and consent, the process of testing, and then the delivery of the results, the engagement reference group were able to provide input all the way through that experience. With the engagement reference group, we developed a guide for managing inquiries about the study so that patient support organisations knew what to say about Mackenzie's mission and knew how to access information if they needed it. They provided input into content for education, also the decision aid that was developed, and also the consent. The group provided guidance on what data needed to be collected to effectively measure and evaluate the screening program. They also provided advice on the genes and conditions that were included in the screening. One of the really key elements of our meetings in the engagement reference group was that they really kept us accountable around accessibility and making sure that we were doing our best to make sure the screening was as accessible as possible to people who wanted to access it through the study. And they also worked with us to develop a list of relevant support groups and provided guidance around the types of supports people would need when managing results. So we're now in a really interesting stage because this year we're hoping to see that there'll be a Medicare item number for carrier screening for CF, Fragile X and SMA towards the end of this year. There's also been a Medicare item number recommended for 9 conditions common to people of Ashkenazi Jewish ancestry, so for carrier screening for that. And there's work ongoing from Mackenzie's mission for another submission for a Medicare item number for a much larger number of conditions to be screened, similar to what was done in Mackenzie's mission. And so work really needs to continue with key stakeholders like healthcare providers, medical scientists and the rare disease community to really work together to advocate for screening that's offered in an accessible and an appropriate and ethical way. So it's really important that community stakeholders really continue to engage around this so that we can make sure we're really offering screening that's going to serve the needs of the population. And so the way that this can be done is by providing guidance on conditions that should or should not be included in screening, and really continuing to advocate for the involvement of appropriate health professionals and making sure that there are the appropriate supports available for those who undergo screening. So I think this is a really interesting time, and certainly, definitely we're welcoming input and ideas about how we deliver these services appropriately. And I guess I just wanted to also acknowledge all the people that have had input into Mackenzie's mission and also our screening services at VCGS. We've certainly very much appreciated that and continue to appreciate that. So thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is Carla Carroll and I'm the Program Manager for the Industry Genomics Network Alliance. I've been asked today to talk to you for a bit about Ingena, how and why we came together, and some of the things that we've learned in the process. So for those of you who don't know us, Ingena is an alliance of industry members who work in the field of genomics, from diagnostics pathology through data analysis and bioinformatics platforms, and also pharmaceuticals. Now, I don't need to tell this audience why effective use of genomics is so important. The science of precision medicine has so much potential to improve the lives of patients and families and to improve the efficiency of clinical utilisation. But the science is useless unless it's integrated well into the system. Ingena was conceived in October of 2019. Roche had identified that genomics was part of a rapidly progressing revolution in the potential of healthcare, and the industry had an important role to play in implementing this vision. But the genomics landscape as a whole, and particularly industry, was fragmented and siloed. Roche engaged Deloitte to bring the genomics industry together at a whole-day workshop to discuss the common challenges and opportunities that industry saw in genomics in Australia. From that workshop, it was decided that an industry alliance should be formed to continue the discussion and allow industry to do our part. So Ingena launched almost exactly a year later, with the purpose to allow industry to speak with a common voice to join the effort to integrate genomics into healthcare. Ingena is hosted by the Australasian Institute of Digital Health, the AIDH. Being housed by an existing organisation meant that we were able to take advantage of all the supporting structures the Institute already has and to really hit the ground running. Of course, it wasn't as easy and neat as a few slides make it seem. From my perspective, Ingena as an alliance faced three really big challenges. One, we have a diverse set of members. They range from tech startups to huge international pharma companies. Following on from that, our vision is big. Integrating genomics into healthcare is a job that will never be finished as technology continues to evolve, and yet we needed to identify tangible outcomes that demonstrated value. Finally, not everyone understands or trusts the motivations of industry within the health sector. We know that we have to earn that trust and to continue to be worthy of it. The first challenge is, I think, common to a lot of alliances, and that is that we have a diverse membership, each with different priorities and specialties. Having AIDH as a secretariat with an independent chair means that we've got an unbiased team administrating and managing our projects. And for my part, I try to be mindful that every member and every segment of our membership has their voice heard, regardless of the level of resources that they have. Genomics moves fast, and there's a lot of work to do. So another big challenge for us that we're still working through is how to focus and get important things done. Some of the key strategies which I believe have helped is the way that we're structured into subcommittees or working groups based on specific needs and expertise of members, rather than trying to have our big full member steering committee try to drive every single project. We have patient representation on our steering committee and on each of the working groups, so we can regularly check in that what we're planning is actually going to be helpful for the people that we're trying to help, and also broader stakeholders consultation to see what work is already underway and to check that other groups think that our ideas are actually of value. And we move on to the last challenge I want to discuss today, which is the challenge of trust and how industry can stay in our lane while still contributing our significant skills, expertise, and resources. Staying connected to patients is a big part of that, and something that our members consistently report as a benefit of being a member of Ingena. It gives them that avenue to engage with patients. We also use principle-based decision-making, and we remain very aware of ACCC guidelines. So now on to the opportunities that Ingena has helped create. The number one opportunity that Ingenia was created to capitalise on was to bring the significant skills and expertise of industry to the table. Ingenia acts as a focus point for these resources to be collected and work together to help solve the challenges in bringing genomics to the community. Similarly, Ingenia is doing our part to coordinate conversations between stakeholders in the genomics landscape by being a one-stop shop for genomics industry consultation. This helps stakeholders, especially government, involve industry without the perceived conflict of interest attached to approaching any single company. We also provide a contact for researchers who are looking for industry involvement, so either through Ingenia directly or through a fostered relationship with one or more of our members. And perhaps the best example of this is the Precision Health Roundtable we held in Canberra last October. This event brought together patient advocates, researchers, clinicians, policymakers and industry to discuss the key challenges facing the adoption of genomics as a standard part of Australian healthcare. The event was well attended, sparked a lot of valuable conversation and knowledge exchange, and was a really fun day. A few more things that Ingenia has achieved in our 2.5 years. We've spoken to MPs, we've held numerous webinars, we've produced election statements, and we're working on building relationships with the Department of Health and Aged Care. And we've also released 4 major publications. So the last question that Monica asked me for this presentation was how I see an alliance of patient support groups could be of value. Health systems are really complex, especially in Australia. And again, this is something I don't need to spell out to this audience. But the fact that it's a complex web means that we really need collaboration of the players, all of the players, if we want to make change. I think Ingenia has helped to bring industry to the table, and I think a similar patient advocate alliance could further patient engagement in a similar way. Just as Ingenia acts as a united voice for industry engagement, a single point of contact for alliances of patient support groups would make it easier for other stakeholders to engage with patients. I can attest it would help me personally in my job. Secondly, being able to consolidate knowledge amongst and between yourselves can be hugely valuable. And this also helps to reduce duplication of work and wasted energy. When organisations come together in an alliance, it can reinforce and amplify a message. So if you do choose to go down this road, I think the challenges you face will be in many ways similar to Ingenia. You have a diverse set of goals and priorities, and in some ways compete for funding and public awareness. But I don't think these challenges are insurmountable. And for Ingenia, they've certainly been worth the effort to work through them. So that's all from me. Thank you for the opportunity to present on Ingenia, and if you have any follow-up questions or are interested in engaging with us, you can reach us at ingenia@digitalhealth.org.au. Thank you.
We really do appreciate the time that people take to prepare those presentations for us and for sharing and being so transparent as well. I think it's important to recognise the transparency in the presentations from people.
Thank you to Monica and GSNV for the invitation to join you on this very important day. It's lovely to see so many familiar faces and catch up, in real life with everybody. So Monica did pose a few questions, as you would have seen from Carla and Richard and Ali's presentations. A few questions were posed to us to sort of get the conversation flowing this afternoon. And I didn't prepare slides for a short talk, but I have got a cheat sheet to kind of keep me on script, because going through the challenges of establishing an alliance from the Australian genomics perspective, might be cathartic for me, but I want to keep vaguely on script, and it might be amusing for you. So as a bit of background, so Australian Genomics was actually formed in 2015 as in response to a targeted call for research. So this was a large NHMRC grant that had 40 organisational members at that stage, all coming together to deliver an academic research program about preparing Australia for the revolution in genomic medicine. And so that initial 40 organisation alliance has now grown to over 100 organisations and thousands of members from across the genomic value chain. So not only academics and researchers, but clinicians, diagnostic people, and industry members, and very importantly, patient support and advocacy organisations, people with lived experience. So in terms of challenges and opportunities that we experienced in establishing the Alliance, so as Carla particularly touched on, individual members will come with their own ambitions, beliefs, priorities, and how does one go about galvanising different members towards a more cohesive vision to deliver output that has sort of that alliance emphasis, I guess. And Richard also, spoke to this sort of challenge of providing the vision and honing the focus to an output that everyone can collectively pull towards. But as part of that, I think, yes, vision, certainly communication, sometimes candid communication, and real transparency about what are the objectives and aims of the alliance, of the collective, and what is not in scope. So maintaining that sense of purpose without the scope creep is often a very large challenge. Another challenge, and this is to be frank, is that you will have members that want to go in a different direction. They have different aims. They want to pull it off course, and sometimes you need to agree to disagree and go your separate ways. It's not the end of the world, but again, being candid, being straight about the alliance's goals, as well as an individual member. Is so critical. And, certainly from the Australian genomics experience, there's been a couple of times that we did try and labour ahead, we did try and keep everyone together, and it was to the detriment of the sort of community as a whole. Another challenge, external angst. There will always be people outside of the tent that are critical, that are unhappy with how the alliance is, the direction they're taking, how they're working, the outputs they're making. And even in an alliance that, is an open community like Australian Genomics, there will ever be people on the outside that are critical. Again, this is a matter of sort of being true to your vision, keeping those members who are, those who are in the coalition of the willing, keeping them engaged, and developing thick skin. It is going to happen. And, as long as you're true about the alliance's aims and outcomes, then in a way you just have to grin and bear it, unfortunately. So it's not all gloom and doom, though. There are certainly lots of opportunities that we experienced as Australian genomics evolved. They're not just opportunities, though. I mean, there's challenges inherent in opportunities as well. So one is the evolution of an alliance. So as an alliance grows and changes over time, it has to change over time, particularly in, an environment where healthcare is evolving so rapidly. And how do you maintain core principles but keep up with the times and the new challenges faced by your members? You may get different membership, acquire some, lose some. You may need to adapt the vision and the activities you're conducting as a collective, but it's, alignment and engagement both within the alliance and with external alliances and collaborations. Look nationally, look internationally, see how others are achieving, their outputs, and where do you fit within that ecosystem of other activities and avoiding duplication. So then to sort of my thoughts on how an alliance of patient support and advocacy groups in rare disease and other stakeholders could be of value. Sort of touching on Richard and Ali and Carla's comments, I think certainly there are fundamental benefits of an alliance of, people with rare disease and patient support and advocacy groups around amplifying that message and getting greater reach and impact, the advocacy that Richard was referring to. But I think a key lesson from Australian genomics has been the importance of multidisciplinarity and getting diverse voices at the table to contribute their unique perspectives and really enrich that how we perceive the vision and outputs for Australian genomics, and really looking at opportunities and challenges from different perspectives has been really critical. So getting lots of different voices at the table, from industry, from clinical and research groups, I think would really enrich the efforts of a rare disease patient alliance. I think that's a bit about it from me. And I think we're not going to have questions later on, but if anyone would like to have a chat, I'd be delighted to speak to you later on. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, Monica and the team, for inviting me to speak today. It's really wonderful to be here in person, to be able to share some of the experiences that I've had and going forward. And I think I've worked with almost everybody that presented this morning in some way. So I'm talking about really the practicalities of how would you think about creating a co-create group. What I'm going to cover is change models, co-creation, and then how rare diseases would come into that, why us and why now, and then focus on how you would go forward. So firstly, this is sort of a general overview of the change models and the participation and collaboration. I think most of you have seen that education, though, sometimes takes involvement from the group that's going to be educated. Often it's not really taken through the whole process. Many of us have been involved in engagement, consultation, informing, and while that feels inclusive, sometimes we don't see it through to the end. When we talk about doing it with, we really talk about being part of that co-create, co-production and co-design. Now, those terminologies are used often interchangeably. When you look at the academic literature, it's very much used interchangeably. But when you talk about co-create and co-production, what you're really trying to talk about is that equal and reciprocal partnership. I thought that this graphic was quite useful in really putting in context the co-create philosophy, is that it is about not only doing the design together, but also doing the delivery, the implementation together. And I think many of you have felt with the participation that you've had over the years in different programs that you might have been part of the design and then all of a sudden it's gone off into the ether and you didn't know what happened, and in the end there's a case study but you're going, where? So I'm sure we all feel that tension. So what I think we'd love to achieve is something that includes the design and the delivery and is an equal and reciprocal relationship between the people. And I use that term people very, very intentionally. It's about the people that live the journey daily, and it's sort of also around the whole infrastructure and environment around them. So, the value of a co-create. I've just broadly said the purpose would be to accelerate access to innovative and sustainable care. That was a broad term that I thought that is what we could potentially align around. I mean, I think the equity of access around the whole of Australia is a given. You wouldn't want to be delivering anything that you can get in the city and not in the rural communities. But the focus is about bringing the wealth of knowledge that we all bring. And I think Tiffany, Carla and Richard all spoke about the different groups that they had in their projects and the diversity of the thought and the way of working that they bring together into it. People's needs are very different, how they're making work accessible, so how they interpret information, and then how they work together needs a variance in how it's done. So sometimes people might like to have a set of questions, go away and respond in a week. Others might like the debate that happens in a room. So recognising that working differently amongst different communities is really important. Carla focused on the trust and the respect that's needed to really make projects work properly. And that's critical. And then building the social network and the support that goes with the project is critical. So the aim would be to deliver better health outcomes, promote equality, and transformative for all participants. Almost as soon as you start participating in a co-create or co-production event, you will be learning. You will be listening, you'll be engaging, and you'll be learning. So no matter whether you're an academic, a clinician, an allied health worker, or a patient, or a carer, you will be taking something away almost immediately. So the value is there immediately. I loved Richard's comment about proactive and forward-looking. I think that is a fundamental. As soon as you look back and retrospective, you take yourself back. So if we're going to put something together, it's about what do we want to deliver going forward, and how can we look at all the changes and innovation that's happening and be proactive. I think that is just such a fundamental point. Cross-functional and interdisciplinary. I think all the previous speakers have spoken about there are so many silos across health, which you'll all know about, and breaking that, and it's just educating people that, it might work like this in their hospital, but the hospital next door, it works completely differently. So sometimes it's quite simple things that helps break that. And the human resources is about the intellect that everybody brings to the room, the ability to share their journey. Inclusivity, a given, and then growing that network. And that network builds resilience. The sharing and the vulnerability that you bring when you're part of a co-create program helps others to build that resilience as you share your sometimes very tough experiences that you've gone through. Now, cost-effective and building efficiencies I've included because that is the way the payers will look at it and the people investing in this will look at it. Is this a cost-effective use of our money and our time and our resources? And what are we going to build that builds efficiency and sustainability going forward? So, Tiffany, I think I nicked your slide. I love this. I think it is so, you've got your patient groups in there and you talk about, we've got people and we've got the communication that happens across people, but there's also that infrastructure. And it's a physical infrastructure. There's a couple of buildings in here. There's also the data infrastructure. And there's all the processes and systems that goes with it. So I love this graphic. And thank you so much for putting it together. Because to me, it really articulates. I get a bit tense when I see this. This is the situation we're in. It's not a lovely, straightforward path. But the opportunity to even just pull some of this together is really there. So I listed out the people involved in it, and it is everybody's involved. I think for a long time, industry has been left out, especially in rare diseases. And I think there is an opportunity to bring the capabilities that they have, like Gina spoke about. There's significant capabilities and ways of looking at things, even if it's, economic modelling, clinical research design, a whole range of those skills you can really learn from and bring in a very comfortable and open and transparent way. I think having state and federal governments included in some ways is really important as well. There's so much variance across those groups and the different departments, but I won't start there. All right, why now and why us and why now? The value and the recognition of lived experience is growing, and I think as groups get more articulate, and I think you've seen, if anybody goes onto Rare Cancer's websites and goes to the work that Noah did, I was part of that work as I was with Gina and as also part of working with Australian Genomics. The work that they've done and that sharing and bringing together has been invaluable. And sharing of those patients' lived experience has been transformational for everybody that it's touched. From industry, from government, you can see the engagement that they've got. So it is a really good example going forward. We've got a lot of innovations coming down the pathway. I started working with Genetic Alliance Australia when I started working on taking pre-implantation genetic diagnosis through to MSAC to get an item number. And I was immediately overwhelmed about the breadth of rare disease around and the challenges that it raised for people. And because it wasn't, I would say, more of a collaborative than a co-create project about speaking to all the disease groups. And that is, I think, is the challenge, is the patient groups are so diverse, but you have a commonality in that you have a whole lot of technology changes coming through, and you'll be having to make a lot more decisions going forward. And how do you build up the capabilities to take that forward? Technology is enabling, like with the Zoom calls today. There's a recognition by the government and the payers of health utility, the value of knowing. Those messages have got through and are starting to be taken up, so we want to capitalise on that. And there's a united drive for change. The challenges have been really well articulated by the people that have spoken before. And Tiff, external angst, I didn't include that, but that is very, very, very true. There is always a lot of criticism, a lot of like, oh, is this going in the right direction? I think that's really important to acknowledge and say, yeah, it's going to happen. We will have a variance in where people think it should be going or what should be done, and we've got to be comfortable with that and make sure we're transparent and articulate where we're going. Then change in lead. There's a lot of change all the time, as you know, with the government and multiple stakeholders, and I think a lot of speakers also identified the competing economic and political factors. I won't talk about this diagram because we'll talk about it this afternoon. It's just a really nice 8 perspectives of looking at patient-centred care. This was taken from the Consumer Health Forum. There are a whole lot of resources that I've used to put this together, and Consumer Health Forum has a fantastic workbook taking you through. And these are the basic principles that you would need to consider going forward, but it's well worked through in that. And the general process, if you're putting together a program, and we'll go through this afternoon, it's about uniting on a purpose, having that goal, being very clear about it, and having a focus on how you're going to take it forward. Having that alignment, having the core principles, how do you work? What is your governance? How are you going to be open and transparent and build that trust and respect amongst your members? Identify your stakeholders, and that could be very broad. So I was part of the Lymphedema Action Alliance, and we started off with 40 groups coming together, ended up with 18 core groups that launched, and it's still running today. What is very, very focused core deliverable around a patient registry to communicate lymphedema needs across the country. So it doesn't always end up where you think it's going to start. Scope was also mentioned. How far you're going to go or where you're going to sit. Having a very clear methodology. There's lots of fantastic work being done in Australia and internationally about how best to run these programs. They can be run as workshops, surveys, integrated work, but the basic premises underneath that is inclusion and respect for each other's and having an equal voice at the table. One thing I've added included in here is the risk assessment, and sometimes people don't think about that. There's the risk of how you work and how you go forward, because there might be unintended consequences of something you do. So there's a little bit of thinking about, well, if we don't do it, what's the risk? And if we do it, what's the risk? And then, the basic project plan, deliver it, and then reflect. I'd like to comment on reflect. It's the outcome of the project and the outcome of the co-create team that took it together. Often this reflection time gets forgotten off. You're so excited, it's launched, it's gone through, and it's like, okay, so what worked for the project and what worked for us as a co-create team, and what would we do better? So you bring it into your continuous improvement, and everything you've learned, you go, well, now we're ready for our next project. How would we do it better next time? So there's all learnings that you just want to positively incorporate going forward. I'm sure I've overspent my time, but so in conclusion, what do you want to do and how would you like to do it? Here are some tools and tips to take forward this afternoon. Happy for any questions. And thank you very much. And they're my resources that you can all, they'll be on the slide deck. Good. Thank you.
Well, that concludes the formalities of this morning, but a very huge thank you to all of our speakers and to everyone who has joined us this morning. We will take questions, just not now, so we will welcome questions from all our people online and everyone in the room. Please, either if they're for Tiff or Nikki, grab them in the next 5 minutes before they run away, or not that Nikki's running away, but feel free to forward questions to us. We will field them and we will collect the answers to those questions for everybody. Lots of food for thought from those presentations this morning. Just a couple of things that stayed with me. So Richard's focus on common purpose, such a really clear message that, and it came through in every presentation, but that need for what is the common purpose, and don't stray outside that. I don't know if anyone else noticed, but in Ali's presentation, she actually, it's the first time I've ever been in a presentation, she made this statement, so in this century, and then went on to talk. Oh my God, that makes me feel so old when we're now saying last century and this century. Wow, genomics is just out of control, isn't it? That we're comparing centuries already. But Ali also talked about building out engagement. So she talked about where the Mackenzie's mission engagement began and then building it out to serve the purpose. And I think that was a really interesting message and something to think about as well. Carla talked about a number of things, but also the recognition of challenges and being transparent about them and having a plan for them. So seeing them clearly and then taking them on. And I think that was then echoed in Tiff's presentation, where that acknowledgement of it's not easy to do some of these things, and hence the need to stand together. I think I use the expression about finding fellow travellers, and I think that's part of what we as a rare disease community do quite naturally, is we find fellow travellers. And what we're exploring here is finding fellow travellers and a common path for the travellers and the common purpose. And Tiff, you reinforced for us the importance of being dynamic in understanding that pathway and having some agility on that pathway as well. And Nikki, cutting that last slide was a cracker. That there was the complexity of the task ahead. And there's the challenge about how we go about as a community tackling that or not tackling that. And finding not just the pathway, but a pathway that is effective but manageable for our community as well. It has to be achievable, whatever comes out of this afternoon. So I think that acknowledgement of a truly complex environment, but understanding that we need to find a pathway that is manageable for us all. So just to return to the whole theme of today for us, the nothing about us without us. And we've looked at how different collaboratives, different alliances have moved forward with maybe not those words, but have found a way. And that's our challenge for this afternoon. So it's now time for lunch, and thank you to all of the people that joined us this morning and I'm aware there are questions and comments in the chat. Thank you so much. We will respond to them, and we look forward to catching up with you again somewhere in the rare disease world. Thank you.